All right, Paul, ready?
Yeah.
All right, we're about ready to go on the air. 3, 2, 1. It is Selection Sunday night in East Lansing, Michigan. My name is Jim Comparoni, SpartanMAG.com. Come on in, gather around, gather around, gather around. Thanks for waiting. We got Paul Konyndyk, Associate Editor, SpartanMAG.com, on the horn. Going to talk Michigan State basketball. Selection Sunday, the draw for the Spartans, what it's going to look like Friday in Cleveland, and going forward, a little bit about what happened, maybe a lot about what happened this past weekend in Indianapolis. Michigan State beating Oregon, then dropping that game in the semifinals of the Big Ten tournament to Wisconsin. What does that mean? What do the Spartans look like heading into the big dance for what, the 26th straight time, 27th if you count COVID? Tom Izzo, Michigan State, consecutive tournament appearances, more than anyone in the history of college basketball, the college men's game. Izzo, congratulations to him getting back in. That's no small feat. Going in as a number 2 seed. Going to be taking on Bryant University Friday in Cleveland. And it's going to be an interesting one. Let's bring in Paul Konyndyk right now. Paul, how you doing, my friend? I know you've had a busy weekend. You doing good? Everything good?
I'm doing great, man. It's awesome to be talking about postseason basketball, and this is a great time of year as always.
All right, so Michigan State coming off that loss against Wisconsin. We'll talk about that in a moment. First of all, Bryant University. I've been watching a little bit of their film, doing some research on them tonight, on that team already tonight, and over at SpartanMAG.com. We will have, tomorrow morning, have a thorough breakdown of Bryant University over at SpartanMAG.com. Go over there, $1. Get you a subscription to SpartanMAG.com for the week. You can test drive it, and then hopefully you'll become a Magger long-term. It'll be a good long-term addiction for you. A lot of Michigan State Maggers addicted out there, and we love the support that we get from Spartan Maggers across the country and across the world, all over the world, really. So Bryant basketball, 23-11. Phil Martelli Jr., head coach, in his second year there, but at the NCAA tournament, they went to the tournament a couple of years ago when he was an assistant coach. They did not go last year. They lost to Vermont in the America East Conference Championship, but been watching some film of them. Paul, I don't know if you've seen any of them or have you heard any of the initial talk about Michigan State's initial opponent. I know you've watched New Mexico. We will get to that in a minute. I asked you about an hour ago to check out some New Mexico film. I look forward to hearing what you had to say about that. But first of all, your initial thoughts about Michigan State's draw, Bryant University, 2 seed versus 15 coming up on Friday.
The 2 seed versus 15 seed can sometimes it's not a great game, but sometimes the 15 seed's a really, really good mid-major team. And, I think Bryant, they've done a lot of good things this year. They rebound at a pretty high level, offensive rebound at a pretty high level for a mid-major team. And I think they're getting maybe 33% of their misses on offensive glass. So that's always something that stands out to you. And they've got some balanced scoring. I do know a lot more about New Mexico than Bryant, but I think they're a good, solid, well-coached team, and I think traditionally that's been a pretty decent conference. With some of the team that usually comes out of that conference is a team, not to be scared of, but a team to take seriously and get your work done.
Yeah, as far as the history of the America East, in 2022. Bryant made the NCAA tournament as a member of the Northeast Conference. At that time, Phil Martelli Jr. was an assistant coach to Jared Grasso. Grasso was in his 4th year. Grasso stepped down 2 years ago, and there wasn't much came out about that, but a week later, there were some charges, hit-and-run charges that were eventually dropped, but he resigned, hit-and-run charges. Martelli became the head coach. He's done a good job with them since then. And Izzo talked about it at the press conference today over at Breslin. Izzo's very good friends with Phil Martelli Sr., the longtime head coach at St. Joseph's. When Martelli Sr. became an assistant coach and interim coach at Michigan for a few games in the last couple of years, Izzo and Martelli share some heartfelt hugs there in the handshake line. Izzo really loves Martelli. And like Martelli Jr. said earlier this week, Izzo was on Martelli Sr.'s podcast a week or so ago. Martelli Jr. said that he received a phone call from Izzo congratulating him on winning the regular season championship in the American East, I think it was, and then called Phil Sr. and said, you know what, some of these bracketology forecasts have Michigan State matching up with Bryant. So if Izzo says he's not watching bracketology, he is. He saw Bryant was a possibility, called Martelli Sr. They were talking a little bit. Martelli Jr. has great respect for Izzo, as a lot of coaches do across the country. So that's going to be an interesting one. Now, back in 2022, 3 years ago, when Martelli Jr. was an assistant for Bryant University, they made the NCAA tournament that year. They were in the first four. They lost to Wright State by about 10 or 15. So they've been in the tournament before, not these players, but the program has. But this year, 23-11, that's the most records, the best record that Bryant has ever had as a Division I program, and it was their first America East title. They come into the NCAA tournament with a 6-game win streak. They've won 9 out of 10. The American East Conference, those of you that are basketball fans, you've seen American East every year get in the tournament. It's teams like Albany, Maine, Maryland, Baltimore County. You may remember Maryland, Baltimore County, the Retrievers. They upset Virginia as a number 16 seed, first time that ever happened. Back in 2018, number 16 seed. Maryland, Baltimore County out of the American East defeated number 1 seed Virginia. That's this conference. Normally, they are a 15 or a 16 seed. The last 3 games, Bryant has won their games by 11, by 13, by 20 for the season, +5 in rebounding margin. Very good rebounding margin. Really good size for this team, especially in the America East. They are bigger than any team that they see in the America East. As far as losses, they lost to Vermont, the most recent losses. Low-scoring games, lost at Vermont February 20th, 59-55. Lost at Albany February 6th, 68-63. In terms of major conference opponents, only one. They lost to St. John's 99-77. More on that game in a moment. As far as other teams in the NCAA tournament, they lost to Grand Canyon 112-66. Now, the American East is a low major conference in terms of mid-major opponents that they've played. They played a couple of Atlantic 10 teams. Atlantic 10, a good conference. I think they maybe have only got one team in this year, but they have Dayton, George Washington, VCU. Some good teams in the Atlantic 10. They played St. Bonaventure, lost by 15. St. Bonaventure's 22-11, pretty good team. Lost to Fordham, a sub-500 team, by 2 points, 86-84. Bryant began the season 3-3. Then they got rolling, got hot. Last year, the American East champion was Vermont. Vermont went 28-7, won the American East. I think they beat Bryant in the American East title game. Vermont played Duke last year in the NCAA tournament, beat Duke by 23 points. Actually, beat them by 20 points. So that was American East last year. Now, last year, Bryant went 20-13, did not make the NCAA tournament. But last year, Paul, they played Rutgers at Rutgers, lost 66-57. And they've got some returning players from that team. Last year, Paul Konyndyk, Bryant University went to Florida Atlantic and defeated Dusty May and the Owls 61-52 on the road. Other major conference games, lost at Xavier by 25, lost at Cincinnati by 30, lost at Ole Miss by 17. That was Bryant last year. Long story short, they've been on the court with some pretty good teams. This is a group of players with good size. They've got some well-built, muscular guys. They will look forward to proving themselves against a Big Ten opponent. They've been on the court with Rutgers, St. John's the last couple of years, been on the court with Cincinnati, Xavier, Ole Miss. They won't be freaked out by that. They're accustomed to playing in front of 1,000 attendance figures. So 15 or 20,000 at Cleveland will be a little bit different for them, that's for sure. The St. John's game, let me see, the halftime score was interesting. Halftime score is back in December or November. St. John's 45, Bryant 41. St. John's won by 20 plus, but Bryant hung with them for a while. They don't have much depth. They'll go about 7 deep. They've got 4 guys in the starting lineup that normally will play like 34, 35, 36 minutes in a tight game. So that probably led to a wearing down process against St. John's. I've not watched that game yet. I don't know if I'll go all the way. Yeah, I might go back and watch the first half of that. St. John's had like 78 shot attempts that day. Turned over Bryant a lot, hit the offensive glass a lot, steals, and ended up with a ton of shots and ended up by winning by 25. But that thing was tight at halftime. I'll get into the personnel here in a minute. But, Paul, as I go through those numbers, those 10,000 feet macro particulars for Bryant, any of that information jump out to you? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the one thing is it's the St. John's game will prepare Bryant well for Michigan State because there are some similarities between what Michigan State does and St. John's does. And Michigan State's athletic, St. John's is athletic. They both rebound really well. They both defend really well. And neither St. John's nor Michigan State shoot the three at a really high level. So the physicality and the athleticism that St. John's brings to bear on a basketball court will kind of give Bryant a nice primer for what they'll face in Michigan State. So I think, that's something that will help Bryant in prep for Michigan State. And then, the Phil Martelli thing, like Martelli's is friends with Izzo, obviously, but he coached for a million years at Michigan as an assistant coach. And he's, butted heads with Izzo more times than you can count. And I'm sure, as such that Phil Martelli Jr. will have a pretty good grasp of what Michigan State wants to do. It comes down to, like, can Bryant, as a mid-major, can they keep Michigan State off the glass? And Bryant is a good rebounding team, and Michigan State is a really good rebounding team when everyone's on the same page and out of foul trouble. And Michigan State runs pretty well, and that's going to be a challenge for Bryant, a team that doesn't have great depth. Preventing Michigan State from getting out and running because, everyone in the Big Ten wants to stop Michigan State from running. Some teams do. This year, a lot of teams have tried and haven't been able to. So it's going to be a whole different kind of dynamic for Bryant. But I do think that playing a team like St. John's is especially helpful for those guys in preparing for Michigan State because there is some similarity in some personnel and as far as having guards that can penetrate in like a really good offensive rebounding team and that type of thing.
All right, I lost my signal there for a second, but I did hear you, but I went blank on the screen here for a moment. A minute ago, I had Earl Timberlake up on the screen. He is kind of a power guard for Bryant, Conference Player of the Year for Bryant University, 6'6", 220, a fifth-year senior. Transfer from Memphis, averaged 15 points a game, 8.2 rebounds, 5 assists per game at a muscular 6'6", 220. Let me see if I can get that picture back up here. I had it a second ago. Let me do it again. I'll have to shrink it. We've got the football stadium background. I apologize to the basketball fans. I had Breslin there for a minute, but I lost that one. There's a look at Timberlake right there. First team All-Conference last year, Conference Player of the Year this year. Has some versatility to him. Last year averaged 14 and 9. And then in 2023, 3 years ago, was second team All-Conference. As a sophomore at Memphis the year before in 2022, 4.7 points per game, 11 starts, 17 minutes, then he hit the transfer portal. The year before that, as a freshman, 2021, played at Miami for the Hurricanes. 9 points per game, but injuries went into the portal. This guy, Earl Timberlake, was a 4-star recruit. He was ranked the number 36 player in the country coming out of high school. I think he was from Long Island. I'm not sure about that. I'll have to look that up. That was the same year that Cade Cunningham was the number 1 player, high school player in the country. So this guy is a veteran guy, former top 50 recruit, Conference Player of the Year. So had some rough struggles at the beginning of his career, but he's come along to dominate a low major conference. Earl Timberlake, 6'6", 220, fifth-year senior, transfer from Memphis, will not be intimidated in this game. Good passer, good rebounder. He will be looking to prove himself, and they've got a large starting lineup, Paul. You mentioned the rebounding. They've got a center by the name of Mitchell, 6'11". He's a sophomore. Wears number 22. Kind of a raw guy, kind of a project, but he's had a couple of pretty good games. They'll do drop coverage. You can drive at him. He's kind of like a baby deer in terms of his mobility is not all there yet. 6'11", 215 is a sophomore from Brooklyn. Keyshawn Mitchell. Let me see. I've got a image of him also. Here he is. That's Mitchell. Got him on the screen for people watching at home. Mitchell All right, check this out about Mitchell, sophomore. He only averages 8 points and 6 rebounds. You know, they do get paint touches, though. I've watched about 7 minutes of their game against Maine, the conference championship game, which was yesterday. And the conference championship was played 4 days after the semifinal. So it's a good read on them. It's not a situation where they played 4 games in 4 days and everybody's, you know, playing with heavy legs. They get paint touches, move the ball. This guy, Mitchell, stats are not great. However, against St. John's, this 6'11 sophomore, 21 points, 12 rebounds. And then he went, after that, he only had double figures in like only 5 more times the rest of the regular season. So this guy goes 21 and 12 against St. John's, but he hit double figures only 5 more times the regular season. However, the last 2 games, 21 and 13 against Albany, 14 and 12 against Maine. Not a dominant player, but he's 6'11", and I'm not going to say he's a great rim protector, but he's somewhat active. He's an obstacle in there. It's not like this is a team that's got a 6'5" center. This guy's 6'11", and he's probably the 5th best player out of the 5 starters. But Timberlake is the standout, 6'6", 220, and former top 40 recruit. When I say that, Paul Konyndyk, about Timberlake, what comes to mind for you about him?
Well, I'll get to him in a second. One thing about a guy like Mitchell is it's easy to look at him not having double figures, but then you look at his minutes and then you look at his stats. He's averaging 23 minutes a game, and he's putting in 8.6 points and 5 or 6.9 rebounds a game for going 20 minutes a game. So I think sometimes, like when you have a team that plays some different guys, it's easy to overlook a dude like Mitchell, just like it's easy to overlook a guy like, Carson Cooper or Jackson Kohler from Michigan State. But like guys like going over to the Timberlake guy, he's kind of one of those sized guys that kind of scare you sometimes. The 6'6", 220 type, the tweener. He doesn't shoot the 3 ball really well. Otherwise, maybe he'd be a little bit more scary. But those are guys that sometimes you wonder about who's going to guard him to the Timberlake guy from Michigan State. And I'm not sure how good he is at getting downhill and getting in the paint. Mm-hmm. But that's a guy that you would really like, Cohen Carr coming off the bench to kind of do a nice job with. But also you're kind of concerned with, and I'll go back to the Wisconsin game yesterday with John Tonje, who's kind of similarly sized. He's a big physical dude that is hard to guard. Now this guy's a lot different, but those guys take a lot of energy for a guy like Jaden Akins, who's, got decent size, but not, he's not as big as that. And, it's not just like what a guy can do, but it's what a guy does to your team. And I felt like in both Wisconsin games that Michigan State played, John Tonje, except for maybe like 10 minutes where Jaden Akins got red hot, the amount of energy it took for him to guard a guy like that, it kind of negated what he could do on offense. And, but guys like Timberlake are always a problem because you get the physicality aspect. He's not going to be intimidated. I just based on a couple highlights I was just watching in the background, it looks like he can jump a little bit. So the athleticism piece is something that you don't always face against a mid-major team. But anytime you got a guy that's in that size range, it's kind of scary. Even more scary if the guy can hit threes, and he doesn't hit a lot of them. Mm-hmm. But you just never know in a game like this if he gets hot, because we've talked about these kind of mid-major matchups in the past, and there's always a guy that's hitting 32%. You're thinking, oh, no big deal, but then he hits 3 or 4 of them in a game, in an NCAA tournament game. So you just never know with a guy like that. But they are big sized, and it's not a game where I think Michigan State can just pound them on the glass like they would some other teams.
This team will be fired up to challenge Michigan State on the glass. Michigan State will be charged up and ready to go as well. Just across the board, starting lineup for Bryant, backcourt goes 6'6", 6'6", 6'8". Front line goes 6'8", 6'11". It's 6'6" senior, 6'6" fifth-year senior, 6'8" junior, 6'8" sixth-year senior, and a 6'11" sophomore. Uncommon size for the American East, a lot of experience. The guy we've got on the screen right now is Rafael Pinzon, senior. He is a guy that will shoot three-pointers. They got a couple guys that'll shoot a lot of threes. This guy Pinzone, 18 points per game, leading scorer. We talked about Timberlake, Conference Player of the Year. This guy Pinzone, leading scorer, 18.5 points per game, 38% from three, 81 made three-pointers on the year. By comparison, Michigan State's leading three-point shooter in terms of makes this year, Jaden Akins with 50. This guy's got 81 on the year against American East competition, but he's a guy that'll shoot it a lot and hits 38%. 6'6" senior from Puerto Rico, transfer from St. John's. Last year was a sixth man for Bryant, averaged 13 points per game last year. Sophomore at St. John's, 6 points per game, had 2 starts for St. John's back then, was a 3-star recruit, number 6 player in New York coming out of high school. He's from Long Island, number 6 player in New York by ESPN. So Pinzone and Timberlake sharing the ball. Pinzone is a shooter. They've got a muscle guy that's kind of a tweener backcourt banger guy, Barry Evans, 6'8", 215, junior. He's from Baltimore, transfer from St. Bonaventure, 13.5 points per game, 37% from three-point range. So this guy's like 6'8", 215, muscle guy, shoots it well enough, 41 makes on the year, which is a little bit fewer than Akins, but a decent number at 37%. He had 2 starts at St. Bonaventure before transferring over. And then they've got a shooter, 6'8", Connor Withers, kind of a Frankie Fiddler type, 6th-year senior, transfer from UMass Lowell. He's from Brooklyn, 8 points, 7 rebounds, and 33% from three, 11 points per game. I was reading Mitchell's stats. Connor Withers, 6'8", 200, 6th-year senior. He's the Frankie Fiddler type, 11 points per game, 33% from three, 79 makes. Again, 79 makes for Withers, 81 makes for Pinzone compared to 50 makes for Akins leading Michigan State, just to give you a familiarity there. So Withers is the guy that can shoot it, second-year starter. He was on the team that started last year and gave Rutgers a tough game. Those are the starting 5. When you're talking about, once again, 6'6", 6'6", 6'8", 6'8", 6'11". And the first guy off the bench is a 6'7", 5th-year senior. So, Paul, when you talk about dangerous 15 seeds, dangerous low majors, they got size, they got three-point shooting, they've got experience. On paper, those things are things that will get your attention, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, those, and you just kind of wonder, like, because Michigan State has had some issues at times with some teams like that. I think, like USC, when you look at their like roster composition, they've got a lot of those guys that are big wing types.
Yes.
And part of the issue for Michigan State has been, can you make open shots? And like on any given day, Michigan State's not making open shots or isn't able to get to the basket. Because that, like against these type of teams, mid-range is usually there, especially when you get the drop coverage. But that 6'7", 6'8" type, long enough arms to keep you away from the basket if they pack it in. And then like when Michigan State has had issues like that, then you're always concerned, like, is this going to be the day where the shot doesn't fall? And so that's always a concern with Michigan State until it isn't. And I don't think there's going to be a game this year that I don't go into it thinking that, hey, maybe this team will not be able to exploit the weakness of a given defense, because that perimeter shooting has been an issue, and I think it will continue to be. Although I think they have gotten better. I think Thomas was talked about a lot. We all are aware of it. Other teams have struggled as well. Maybe they don't talk about it as much, but I think that's. I'm always going to be concerned about a team if Michigan State's not able to A, get out and run, B, get to the free throw line pretty regularly and make their free throws, and then can you hit the mid range? And those are things I'll be looking for when they play those guys, because if you play drop coverage and you can't hit a mid range shot, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah, this is a team that from what I've seen against most opponents in the American East, they will get out and play pressure man-to-man, get in the passing lanes, go for steals. Against Michigan State, like you said, maybe pack it in, may make Michigan State prove they can shoot it first. In recent games, Michigan State has shot it well to begin with. Overall, Michigan State faster, deeper over the course of time, foot speed, wearing them down against a team with not a lot of depth over the course of time. I think I saw an initial Michigan State favored by 26, something like that. Just having watched a few minutes of their game against Maine thus far, and then first of all, I studied all those stats I mentioned before, then started looking at the visuals. I can see that 25-point margin in terms of the odds right now. I can understand that. This team, Bryant, I'll say it at first blush. Well, I'll wait till I watch them some more to draw a comparison to a Northwestern or a Minnesota or someone like that. We'll have to wait and see. But a credible opponent, and what they are is they're experienced. And, Paul, they're a champion. And when you've won a championship, a regular season championship and a tournament championship, you start thinking, hey, why not us? We're from the American East. We're going to do just like Maryland, Baltimore County did. We're going to go out and make a name for ourselves. We can play. My guy Timberlake's going to say, hey, man, I'm an NBA player. I'm going to shut someone down. He was defensive conference defensive player of the year, so Timberlake likely will be guarding Jace Richardson. I'm sure he'll know where Jace Richardson is on the mock drafts. Timberlake's going to go out there and try to shut him down, and he's going to be bigger, stronger, older than Richardson. So that's where that game starts. It's going to be fun. I've not seen any zone defense from them yet, but like you said, Martelli Sr. is going to be an interesting component here. He has, I'm sure, a thick scouting report on Michigan State over the last couple of years. That'll be helpful for his son. That's going to be an interesting side note right there. Before we get into New Mexico, I know you've been watching them. We'll talk about that in a minute. But just talking about the bracket, the NCAA tournament draw overall. Michigan State getting New Mexico and Marquette on the other side. The reason we're going to talk about New Mexico is because people that watch this podcast are big college basketball fans. You already know about Marquette. Marquette came into the season as a preseason top 20. Michigan State played them in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago. Marquette was a very good team that year. Won the Big East tournament. Was a very, very good team. A team capable of going to the Final Four. Michigan State played great that day, knocked them off. Then in the Sweet 16, Michigan State lost in overtime to Kansas State. That Marquette team was terrific. Marquette this year, a little bit of a disappointment, 23-10. Shaka Smart's team is 13-7 in the Big East. Disappointment there. But earlier in the year, Marquette beat Maryland, beat Purdue, beat Wisconsin, beat Georgia. Then they got in the Big East tournament and struggled a little bit. They lost to St. John's 3 times. Lost to UConn twice. Cam Jones was a preseason All-American candidate. He was a freshman that played in that team 2 years ago. Might have been a sophomore. Good shooter. 40% from three-point range last year. 36% the year before that. 39% from three-point range as a freshman. But this year, Cam Jones, preseason first-team All-American candidate, only 31% from three-point range this year. Cam Jones has not had a great year, but he's dangerous. David Joplin was a stretch 4, if I remember right, shooter. Played in that game 2 years ago. Might have been sixth man, but a dangerous shooter. This year, he's only 31% from 3. But when you have Jones and Joplin, those guys are dangerous for Marquette. A lot of experience there. They lost to Michigan State a couple years ago. They'll be hungry for that one. But if you're Marquette and a Marquette fan, already had kind of a difficult season, and you see Izzo as a potential opponent on a one-day prep in the second round, if you're Marquette, you might not be all that optimistic this year as you were a couple of years ago. That's if Marquette can get past New Mexico. I'll talk more about the macro bracket in a moment, but let's shift to New Mexico. The 7-10 on the other side of the bracket for Michigan State in this subregion. New Mexico against Marquette. Paul, you've had a chance to watch New Mexico a little bit so far tonight. New Mexico 26-7. They lost to Boise State in their conference tournament. They've got victories over UCLA and USC. They've lost to St. John's and Arizona State. What have you seen of the Lobos out of New Mexico?
Well, they also got a win over VCU, which is impressive. That's a good. Mountain West, I think, is typically a good conference. Yes, but yes. You look at it in a bracket. Just talk about the overall bracket for the NCAA tournament this year. So SEC dominant, and I'm not going to complain about that. There's a lot of really good teams in the SEC. But you look at the smaller conference brackets, and the Mountain West has 4 teams, and I think they're four solid teams.
Oh, yeah.
And New Mexico, in my opinion, any one of those 4 teams can beat New Mexico, but New Mexico is a really good team, and this is not a mid-major team. You talked about Bryant having a makeup that they've got big players. New Mexico has got some talent, and it reminds me of. I think they're a really good team. They've got the conference player of the year in Donovan Dent, a 6'2" guard who's an upperclassman, who's, I think, the only player in the country averaging more than 20 points and more than 6 assists per game. He's one of the best penetrators. And granted that at that level of competition, but they've got some good teams in that conference, and he gets in the paint and makes plays, kind of like Tyson Walker. He shoots 40% from three, doesn't shoot a lot of them. And he's also a pretty good facilitator, really good at driving, penetrating, hitting guys in the corner. They've got Defensive Player of the Year inside in Nelly Jr. Joseph, a kid from Nigeria who's 6'10", 250. He's averaging 14 points, 11 rebounds per game. I believe he's top 10 in the country in rebounding. He is really good at, he's a good rim protector. They lead the conference, their conference in block shots. They're number 14 in the country in defensive efficiency. They get a lot of steals. But Nelly Jr. Joseph, for a big guy, from an international big guy, he's not a European player, but I'm surprised at how well, and I haven't watched a lot, a ton of film, but in the highlights that I've seen and some of the extended highlights, I'm surprised at how well he does at passing out of double teams. He's just kind of crafty. And then they've got a lot of guys that can penetrate at all the guard positions. They get out and run. If Michigan State ends up playing New Mexico, this will be a really fun game to watch because it'll be a fast-paced game against teams that like to defend and have a lot of swagger. But this New Mexico team, coached by Richard Pitino, formerly of Minnesota, son of Rick Pitino, there's gonna be a lot of familiarity with Michigan State if these two teams play. But this is a good basketball team that's not going to be intimidated by playing physically. I think that Donovan Dent is a dynamic guard. They've got a couple other guys that can really penetrate, and then they've got two or three 6'9" types that kind of split minutes, that are like one guy's from Finland, another guy's from Serbia, and they are skilled kind of face-up type fours, and they just have a lot of different personnel. They've got size, they rebound well, they run, they get a lot of steals. It's going to be a tough team to play if Michigan State plays them, and it's going to be a really tough, in my opinion. And I've watched Marquette several times this year. Marquette is a good team, not a great team that doesn't have, like you talked about those two guys earlier, that Michigan State saw a couple of years ago. Those guys are good players, but it's a lot different when, you're a complimentary player getting excellent shots, you're lower down on the scouting report, as opposed to being like the two guys on the team that have to get it done. And I think, like a Cam Jones, I think he's a really good athlete. I think he's a really good basketball player. But when you have to constantly play on ball and try to create for yourself, that really wears you down when you're as big a focal point as he is. And that's going to be a great game. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see New Mexico win that game and Michigan State end up playing those guys.
I'm hoping that game will be played before the Michigan State game, so we can just sit there and enjoy that game. Because that's the type of NCAA tournament game I'd look forward to seeing. And New Mexico against Marquette, that'll be a good one. You and I were courtside at Des Moines, Iowa back in 2019 when Michigan State played Minnesota in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Michigan State had a very good team, and they were rewarded by going to the Des Moines region, but Des Moines was a much easier drive for the Gopher fans. And Minnesota fans outnumbered Michigan State fans maybe 3-1 that day. Minnesota hadn't been to the second round of the NCAA tournament in a number of years. Richard Pitino coached that team for the Gophers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That was his sixth year at Minnesota and his high water mark. He went to the NCAA tournament twice in 4 years at that point. Then the next year they went 15-16. The next year 14-15, and he was done. They fired him there. In retrospect, anytime you're firing a coach in and around COVID, Minnesota probably should have taken a longer look at that point. A lot of programs went a little haywire in 2020 and in 2021. So Minnesota, they thought they were better than this. They got rid of Pitino. They hired Ben Johnson, and they fired Ben Johnson this week. In the meantime, Pitino at New Mexico has gone 13-19, then 22-12, and then 26-10 in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago, lost in the first round. And last year they were in the NCAA tournament, lost in the first round. This year, 26-7. They're in the tournament looking to make some more noise. They've gotten progressively better in each of his 4 years at New Mexico. New Mexico is a program that's had some dangerous teams over the years. And I agree with you. The Mountain West, there's some dangerous teams. I think Colorado State is dangerous. Those teams are not on television very often, but dangerous teams. Marquette, New Mexico, going to be a good one. Go ahead, Paul.
The one thing I'd say about the one thing I don't like about Richard Pitino coach teams is I feel like they go too steal heavy and too block heavy. Because go back to when he was at Minnesota, they were always leading the team, always leading the conference in block shots and way up there in steals. And I do think, when you hunt blocks the way his teams do, it's something as simple as a shot fake. I in the highlights that I watched, you got some good shot blockers, pretty good defenders, but the teams that had success against them with guards penetrating, simple as a shot fake and then an extra pass led to baseline type dunks. Michigan State's going to be all over that. Michigan State bigs, I think, do a nice job of that. And I do feel like some of the guards that New Mexico has, they will get. They're not super physical. Maybe one or two of them are pretty physical guys, but they do get out there, try to get up in your kitchen, try to poke the ball away. But I feel like for Michigan State, there's enough ball handling there where they can get downhill, and then that might open some stuff up. I think when you look at another thing with the Richard Pitino type teams, when they wanted to run at Minnesota and they had some of those good teams who were able to get out and transition, and this is a really good transition team. And it's not just transition to kick. They do a lot of, where you got the point guard and he might be on the break. And he'll try to go straight to the basket. They do kickouts and whatnot. But one of the things that I think they do is they give up some transition buckets as well. And I think that was kind of my criticism of some of Richard Pitino's teams. They're pretty good, but just loose enough to get in trouble. And I feel like even though this team has probably more. This team has more overall talent than Minnesota had in the Big Ten this year. I'm comfortable saying that. But it's going to be interesting to see what Michigan State will be able to exploit. But again, this is another team. This is another team that has a high offensive rebounding percentage, much like Bryant. I think they're, they rank, top 20 nationally in blocks, top 30 nationally in steals, top 20 in opponent turnovers. And the other thing that I thought was pretty interesting, their offensive rebound percentage is 28.9, which is good. But the other thing they rank very highly in is top 20 opponent fouls. And that's something that to watch out for, with the way that point guard gets downhill. I think Michigan State has an advantage if Jeremy Fears is out of foul trouble, if Trey Holloman is out of foul trouble, being able to push the ball. But when you start getting a dynamic downhill point guard that's very crafty, then you start worrying about guys like, Jeremy Fears, who's a physical defensive player. If you get the quick whistle, Trey Holloman, physical defender, get a quick whistle. So this is a really scary team to play. And, I've seen a lot of people on social media talk about, okay, Michigan State, they don't really have to worry about it until they get to this point. I'm like, you look at these NCAA tournament games, and there are a lot of good teams out there this year. And I think New Mexico is a good team and the kind of team that would scare me. And I think Michigan State, would be fortunate to get to the Sweet 16. Not saying that they wouldn't get to Sweet 16 against either Marquette or New Mexico, but they're going to have to work for it, as you should work to get to the Sweet 16.
Yeah. And, a week or so ago when I looked ahead to possible second-round matchups, I've not watched New Mexico yet, so I might change my tune when I start watching them here in a day or so, maybe tonight. But your 7-10 Marquette, New Mexico. You look at other 7-10s across the tournament and in other regions. Kansas, Arkansas. I'd rather have this than Kansas, Arkansas, sight unseen. I've not watched New Mexico yet. I know Kansas is kind of limping home. Arkansas struggled throughout the year, but if I'm Michigan State, I'd rather take my chances with Marquette or New Mexico rather than Kansas, Arkansas in a 7-10. Other 7-10s, UCLA and Utah State. I've not watched Utah State. I've heard good things about them. We know what UCLA is, and I realize that UCLA is a Big Ten team, and the tournament does not like to pit conference teams against one another in the second round, but they will do it if there's an abundance of them. Case in point, Michigan State against Minnesota in Des Moines back in 2019, like I mentioned a minute ago. That was a second-round game. I would rather take my chances if I'm Michigan State with New Mexico and Marquette. I might change my tune in 5 days, Paul. But just looking at it right now from 10,000 feet on Selection Sunday, I'd rather play one of those two teams if I'm Michigan State rather than UCLA. Other ones, Vanderbilt and St. Mary's. I'm a little surprised that the NCAA didn't feed Michigan State this one with the A.J. Hoggard possibility. Vanderbilt against St. Mary's. St. Mary's, very good team, the best team maybe they've ever had. Beat Gonzaga twice this year. They've kind of overthrown the czar in that conference. St. Mary's is good. You know, what are they? They're like 27-5, something like that. They're 28-5. They're playing Vanderbilt. Byington with his first year out there has really made a difference. And Vanderbilt 20-12. Hoggard with that team. So they put Vanderbilt opposite Alabama. So there's a chance Alabama might face Vanderbilt in the second round. If I'm Michigan State, I'm not impressed with Vanderbilt. You know what Hoggard is, but you know what, Paul? It'd be interesting theater. It'd be fun to write about. You know, a couple years ago when they put Michigan State in the bracket with Foster Loyer at Davidson. I've been mentioning on the message board at SpartanMAG.com that Michigan State versus Vanderbilt was a possibility. Did not happen. Also, other ones in terms of 15s, you know, Omaha is a 15. Frankie Fiddler's old team, but instead Omaha is being fed to St. John's in the first round. That would have been interesting if they would have had Omaha go against Fiddler's team. Not that Fiddler is a primary player for Michigan State. He began the season in the starting lineup, but he's kind of he's a ninth man at this point, but that's something that they did not do. Now, they did do that with Duke. They put Duke opposite Baylor that has former Blue Devil Jeremy Roach on that roster. Before we talk a little bit more about the brackets, I just want to remind everybody about Shupan Recycling. You've heard about Shupan Recycling. Michigan State Michiganders have lost over $105 million in not returning your cans and bottles for deposit. Take them back. That's a message from Shupan. Take them back. It's good for the environment. It's good for all Michiganders, good for industry, and it's good for your pocketbook. It's great for your beaches, your roads, your lakes. It's good for you. It's worth your time. Take them back. A message from Shupan Recycling. Paul Konyndyk, have you been taking them back?
I have. I've got a son that's doing the Eagle Scout project for Boy Scouts, and we've been getting a lot of donated cans over at the Konyndyk household, and I am grateful for them because they've been funding a good chunk of his Eagle Scout project, and the price of lumber is pretty high right now. So I have been taking them back, and I'm grateful for the return policy in the state of Michigan.
Good man. Elsewhere in Michigan State's region, if Michigan State were to get past New Mexico and Marquette and Bryant, you look ahead, and of course, number 3 seed in their half the bracket, Iowa State, a team that was in the top 10 and a very good team earlier in the season. They've had some injuries later in the year, kind of limped home a little bit. They play first round against Lipscomb, then Ole Miss, possibly in the second round, although San Diego State, North Carolina getting ready to play Ole Miss in the first round as well. San Diego State and North Carolina in the first 4. Over there on that part of the bracket, anything catch your eye? I will say this. If I'm Michigan State, one team that I was worried about in that 3 line was Texas Tech. I think that's a really good team. Other 3 seeds, you know, Kentucky is limping home a little bit. They've got an injury to their point guard. They don't really have a point guard. They played well early in the season, but not so much here lately. Wisconsin is also a 3 seed. It would have been a little bit strange for Michigan State to be in the same region as Wisconsin, not unheard of. But if I'm going to have any 3 seed in the region, I think I might prefer Kentucky. But Iowa State with their current injuries, a lot of these 3 seeds dealing with injuries. Paul, I just think it's advantageous that it's not Texas Tech. Now, with me saying that, watch, Texas Tech's going to lose to Drake in the second round or something like that. But in terms of getting to the Elite 8, you know, Michigan State wins 2 games, gets to the second weekend in the Sweet 16. They could be facing Iowa State, Ole Miss, North Carolina. I don't see any really scary stoppers there on that part of the bracket to get to the Elite 8. Your thoughts on that part of the bracket?
Yeah, I really liked Iowa State. At one point in the year, you know, I think before they lost to Kansas State, and I watched that game pretty closely, I think Iowa State was probably one of my favorite teams to watch. I really liked their coach. I really liked their defensive style. I think really where they fall apart or where they struggle is when they're not out rebounding opponents, which, I mean, it's easy to say because that you know, like if you don't rebound at a high level, if you're Michigan State, you're not going to do as well. Iowa State's kind of in that same boat. I do feel like as they got down the stretch that teams started adjusting to their physicality. They play a really physical brand of basketball. And I think sometimes that does lend itself to injuries, as like, a team like the Houston Cougars, they've had injuries too, and they play as physical as anybody in past years. I like Iowa State a lot, but I think at this time of year, it does feel like they're kind of grinding down a little bit. There's so much parity in college basketball, and I know there's some really good teams out there, like, when they're playing well. But I was just watching Baylor the other day, and I know they haven't had a great year by Baylor standards, but there's like some stretches of that game. I think it was Baylor Houston I was watching, and I just didn't watch the whole game, but I watched 10 minutes, and Baylor's really playing well at home. And I'm like, man, if Baylor plays like this, they're going to be a beast for anybody. And, you look up and down this NCAA tournament bracket, and there's a lot of teams like that, like Louisville as an 8 seed and Creighton as a 9 seed. Those teams have shown that they can beat a lot of people on a good day and maybe not a lot of people on bad days. And you just don't know which team you're going to get. You look at Texas A&M and Yale in the South bracket. I watched Yale play Purdue earlier this year, and I'm telling you what, they gave Purdue at Purdue like absolutely everything they could handle. And that Yale team is tough, and they play smart, and you just never know. There's just a lot of really tough teams, in this NCAA tournament. And Tom Izzo, I think, he kind of encapsulated it in his press conference today when he said the thing about the NCAA tournament is like one bad minute in any game can send you home, and that's just part of what makes this NCAA tournament such a special event.
Yeah, and Yale last year upset Auburn in the first round with Danny Wolf for Yale last year. Iowa State, beginning of the year, looked like a top 5 team. They were up by 19 on Auburn out in Maui, and a tip-in away from beating Auburn back then. Had very good guard play around the perimeter earlier in the year. Then the injuries started coming around. Gilbert was out with a leg injury late in February. He missed that big Houston game, February 22nd. Curtis Jones, first team all Big 12, missed the Houston game March 22nd with an illness. Gilbert and Lipsey did not play against Brigham Young last week in the Big 12 tournament game. Gilbert and Lipsey, 2 important guards, both out. Lipsey has really not been healthy all year, playing like 75%, been gutting it out. Groin injury, re-injured it, I think, against Cincinnati on March 12th. Then he was out March 13th. Curtis Jones, Big 12 Sixth Man of the Year for Iowa State, and he went off against Brigham Young a couple of days ago. He was carrying them. Brigham Young ended up winning that game, but he was kind of going Devin Booker on these guys. He was 6 out of 8 from three-point range in the first 15 minutes of the game, talking about Curtis Jones for Iowa State. Then he cooled off. They've got Momcilovic. He injured his hand. He's coming back. Jefferson's a big point forward, the big body, kind of like a slower Allen Anderson type of guy. This is a team that when they had all their parts together was comfortably a top 10 team, but just kind of limping home as a 3 seed. They had 2 starters out just a couple days ago in the Big 12 tournament. If I'm Michigan State, I'll take my chances with that 3 seed, and that 3 seed might not make the Elite 8. Ole Miss, pretty good. I'll be curious to see. Beard's a very good coach. I watched them a little bit this weekend. I didn't see them playing that no middle defense that they used to do at Texas Tech, but they are good. A lot of people, there's a little bit of a rubber band effect about the SEC. They are very good at the top. Tennessee, Florida, Alabama. Auburn's been stumbling a little bit. After those 4, there's differences of opinion on how good is Missouri, how good is Arkansas, how good is Kentucky, how good is Ole Miss. Some people aren't so sure. I've not really studied them a lot, but that part of the bracket, if I'm Michigan State, there's no Duke in there. The other half, you've got Auburn. If Michigan State were to make the Elite 8 and chalk holds, Auburn looked great 3 weeks ago. They've been limping home. They've lost 3 of their last 4. After they won the SEC outright, they lost at A&M, and they lost at home against Alabama. Then they lost in the NCAA or the SEC tournament, I think, to Florida by about 20 a couple of days ago. Now, when you lose to Alabama and Florida, those are really good teams. Is that a team that's peaked early? We'll have to wait and see. Second round, if they get Louisville, I think Louisville's a little bit better than Creighton right now. Maybe Auburn can get well in time to get into that Sweet 16. All right, so Michigan wins the Big Ten tournament. They played Wisconsin in the title game. Both of those teams have to go Sunday, Thursday, Paul. Wisconsin has to go Sunday, Thursday, West Coast. So they're flying home right now. They're tired as hell. They just played 4 games. They're going straight to bed in Madison, Wisconsin. They're going to take tomorrow off. They're going to be sore. They're going to watch some film. And they're going to get right back on a jet on Tuesday to fly out to Denver. And they're going to play in altitude. Total worst case scenario for the Badgers. Very good team, but not worth their trouble to play in a Big Ten championship game today and lose. They don't get a banner. They're going to be out west at altitude playing Montana. I don't know anything about Montana, but careful with that one, Badgers. Next game at altitude, probably against Brigham Young. I like Wisconsin a lot. I like Brigham Young a lot. Those are 2 teams I thought that could really do damage. And here they are, if chalk holds, going to play each other in the second round. Brigham Young, they're not going to be bothered by altitude. Brigham Young shoots 3-pointers like crazy. They move the ball, quick shot release, and they just fire those threes up, and it's hard to get out on all of them because they catch it and it's up in the air. And they're really good with corner 3-pointers. I don't like Wisconsin's draw, Paul. I like that Wisconsin team a lot. I don't like that draw. Do you have any thoughts about that? Or Michigan they're going Thursday to Lexington. They're playing San Diego. I don't know much about them. A&M is playing the team you mentioned, Yale. I saw A&M destroy Purdue about a couple of months ago. Then A&M beat Auburn 2 weeks ago. And Buzz Peterson, aggressive team. They got a lot of dudes on that A&M team. Michigan just played 3 games in 3 days, a little different than 4 in 4 days. Had an injury. It's going to be tough for Michigan to get their energy back for a Sunday, Thursday. However, I have felt all year that Michigan, with the way they run 4 or 5 ball screens, it's something that you don't see very often. They are a curveball, and they are a team that can do well when they're playing a team on a one-day prep. And they would be playing A&M on a one-day prep. Your thoughts on Wisconsin and Michigan on the Sunday, Thursday? Any thoughts about these Big Ten teams?
Well, I think UC San Diego is a good team, and I think they're going to be a fashionable. The 12-5 is the common upset. It has been traditionally. And Michigan playing in that Thursday, that Thursday game. You watch the Big Ten championship game today. Both teams had open shots and they missed them quite frequently. Like Michigan can get it inside, and that 4 or 5 ball screen works a lot. But the one thing I think that Michigan really struggled with going down the stretch in the Big Ten regular season was you've got that 4 or 5 ball screen, and that's what you're doing, and you're putting a guy like Danny Wolf playing half minutes, handling the ball, and all that, and that's hard to do. And when you're dealing with fatigue, you have to consider turnovers. And I don't think the tournament selection committee did the Big Ten any favors. And I kind of feel this is my gut. Here's my conspiracy theory for the day. But the NCAA tournament selection committee has 14 SEC teams, right? I mean, that's their choice. They've got, all the metrics say the SEC is this, that, and a bag of chips. And I just feel like you look at the Big Ten's draws, and you look at the two teams that were in the tournament championship this afternoon that played a lot of heavy minutes. They're both playing on Thursday. You're not doing the Big Ten any favors there. I feel like there's some other difficult matchups for the Big Ten. I think Grand Canyon against Maryland is going to be interesting, but Purdue High Point is going to be interesting because I think Purdue is on fumes. Mm-hmm. And Grand Canyon is a team that really scores a lot of points and whatnot. Maryland's a team that doesn't have a lot of depth. They're just one foul trouble situation to Julian Reese away from getting bounced out of the tournament. I just feel like
Maryland is fortunate that they didn't beat Michigan.
Yeah, they are, because if Maryland, and I think I've heard their coach a bunch of times talk about, hey, well, I only play 5 guys because those are the 5 guys I want getting shots. Mm-hmm. And then I see Geronimo Allison go in the game and actually do some damage and be like, hey, if he's on any other team in the Big Ten, they'd be using him, including Michigan State, because he's so athletic. That's going to catch up to you sooner or later. And I really like Maryland as a basketball team. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, invest 5 more minutes in some of these guys, because it's going to cost you when Julian Reese is in foul trouble. I mean, that's a guy that you absolutely cannot not have on the floor. And when you got a big guy like that, you got 2 big guys, him and Derek Queen, you've got to have some sort of contingency plan. And that's the only thing I don't like about Maryland. But I just feel like I feel like the Big Ten has some good teams. I'm not sure they're a lot of great teams. I think Michigan State and Wisconsin at their best are very good. I think Maryland without foul trouble is really good, and they're dangerous and hard to guard. I think Illinois, its best version of itself, can make a run. But I don't like Illinois as a basketball team because they're flaky.
Can't trust them.
And I don't think you can trust their coach either, because I think he's flaky too. But there's I wouldn't be surprised if some of these Big Ten teams made runs, but and I don't feel bad that Indiana got left out, or whoever, or Ohio State got left out, because they had more than their fair opportunities to win one or two games down the stretch, and they didn't do it. I'm not certain you should have 14 SEC teams. I'll go back to what we saw last year with Mississippi State. Remember, Michigan State played Mississippi State in that first game, and all the talk was Mississippi State is so physical. They're going to out-physical Michigan State and beat them at their own game. I didn't see that. I saw Michigan State pounding on Mississippi State. So I think sometimes we get caught up in the narrative, and, I don't think a team like Oklahoma, who was really good earlier in the season, but I don't think if you're way under 500 in your conference regular season, you should be in the NCAA tournament. Mm-hmm. I can see with an unbalanced schedule, if you're under 500 by a game or two, but I don't like just saying, okay, this conference is so much better, and then kind of putting everybody, shaping the narrative around that. I would really like, you talked about the A10 earlier. I would like to see one more A10 team, right, or one or two more Missouri Valley teams. Yes. Like one more West Coast Conference team. Yes. It's just, it kind of bothers me that you're going 14 SEC teams, and it's, maybe even one more, I don't know, is the ACC that bad this year? I don't know. But I mean, you can't tell me that there's 14 SEC teams that are just light years ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, when you come in 14th in an 18-team conference, you've had your chances. If you can't cut the cake, pass the knife. Like my friend the Mad Dog used to say, pass the knife. Let's get two teams in from the Missouri Valley. I agree. There'd be more flavor that way. Go ahead, Paul.
I just feel like the whole quad one thing, that's been kind of the talk of everything. You're always like, oh, this many quad one wins. All these power conference teams for so many years have been complaining about, we're so much better than these small schools. Yeah, there's upsets that happen here or there, but the whole quad one thing is just kind of like it's like a con or a scam, in my opinion, to justify skewing having a lot more power conference teams in the NCAA tournament than you've had in the past. And, if you're going to use that Q1 argument to get all those SEC teams in there, maybe you shouldn't put UNC in there, that North Carolina, who's only had one quad one victory this year. And, I'm not sure who else you could replace from the ACC, but it really kind of bugs me that you've got 14 teams from one conference.
Okay, I just got a text
here. We've seen other years where you've had good Big Ten conference teams that, by the way, Rutgers a couple of years ago, that was a team that was worthy of going to the NCAA tournament. Oh, they got left out, and there's been a lot of other examples of that.
Okay, someone posted here that Michigan is in Denver. What I'm looking at, it looks like Michigan's in Lexington.
Yeah, they're out in Denver.
Michigan is? All right, so
yeah, I think so.
Okay, so this NCAA.com bracket is incorrect. This is from NCAA.com.
Are they in Denver? They're in a different time zone, so I know that.
Oh, it is Denver. It is Denver. You're right. So let's see. I may have gotten that wrong. So Wisconsin, where's Wisconsin? Let me look and see where Wisconsin is. You're right. They're both in Denver. They both get Sunday, Thursday, Denver.
And I'll say this, because you and I have covered multiple NCAA tournament games in Denver, and it's like, you remember that year that Michigan State played there? I think it was 2008, and they played Pittsburgh. That was a really good Pittsburgh team.
They won the Big East tournament. There was a very good Pittsburgh team. Yes, go.
Yeah, that was a Pittsburgh team that had three pros there. One Europe guy and two NBA guys. But that was one of the more high-level games that I've seen covering the NCAA tournament in the Sweet 16. Both those teams were ultra-physical. Both those teams were very athletic. And both those teams really had to adjust their rotations to limit minutes because of the altitude. And both those teams were hitting oxygen on the sideline consistently. And you take a team that played on Sunday, and it doesn't seem like a lot because people are like, well, you still have some time off, but there is a lot of residual wear down from a conference tournament, not just physically, but psychologically. And then you take them at altitude. I'm not going to I'll use myself as an example, but I went out a couple of years ago with my son, going back to the Boy Scout thing, and we did a 110-mile backpacking trip up in the mountains. It took me a week to adjust to the altitude, and I was miserable, for the first few days out there. Now, I'm not a great athlete like these guys are, but everyone feels it, and there's a reason why, NFL teams struggle when they play in Denver, and the same thing with basketball.
Sunday, Thursday, West Coast turnaround for Michigan and Wisconsin. Tough situation for them. You look at some of these other subregions. Illinois, like you said, can't trust them. They're playing the winner of Texas and Xavier. That's 3 garbage teams right there. Illinois, Texas, Xavier. But then you look at another subregional. Memphis, good team, 29-5. We know all about Memphis, right? They coasted through their conference. They're playing Colorado State in the first round, 25-9. Colorado State is good from that Mountain West. They got a pro or two on that team. They're playing in the first round. The winner of that one either plays Maryland or Grand Canyon. I like Maryland. They don't have a lot of depth, but they're more built for an NCAA tournament, provided they stay out of foul trouble. I think Maryland is dangerous. I thought Memphis is dangerous. I think Colorado State is dangerous. Those are 3 teams I had the danger category coming in, and they're all in the same sub-regional. Memphis, Colorado State, and Maryland. They're all going to play each other in the first 2 games. And over there on the other side, you got Illinois, Texas, Xavier, Kentucky, and Troy. I don't know. These people know more about it than I do, but seems a little imbalanced. I don't want to be like Vitale. I love Vitale. Glad he's back. But Vitale would always look and see who had the strongest one and who got screwed and stuff like that. All right, UCLA. They're playing Utah State. I've heard good things about Utah State. That's a 7-10. I don't know much about them, but UCLA I think is pretty good. They're opposite Tennessee Wofford. Tennessee played in the SEC Tournament Championship game today. They've been good, but they've had a little, Tennessee has a hang-up like Purdue had for a number of years where they just can't get very far in the NCAA Tournament. They've never been to the Final Four. Good Tennessee team, 2 seed, but UCLA could knock them off. And then UCLA, if they can get past that, they're going to take on that garbage bracket like in Illinois or Kentucky or Texas or Xavier. If UCLA can get past Tennessee, I think UCLA could. I think they're at a 7 seed. They are. There's some value there. I'm not predicting they're going to do that. I'm not picking them to beat Tennessee, but they're a value as a 7 seed, in my opinion.
And I don't know if UCLA is going to get by Utah State. I'm not sure how well Utah State shoots threes, but I feel like UCLA's kryptonite is they'll pack everything in, and they do a nice job with that. But they'll let you shoot. They'll let you shoot a lot of threes, and their field goal percentage defense is good and whatnot. But you saw Wisconsin in that Big Ten tournament did not. They hit a lot of open threes against UCLA, and they hit a lot of open threes, tying the Big Ten tournament record for 3-pointers with 19 in that game. But I thought UCLA's defense was garbage in that game, and that's been a Jekyll and Hyde team. Michigan State got the good version of them. A lot of other teams didn't, and I don't know where that team is psychologically. But the one thing I would say about Tennessee is Tennessee's got some physicality inside and whatnot. And I think Tennessee, that Mara kid from UCLA, the 7-footer, he can be pretty good, but the combination of Bilodeau and Mara, those guys are not physical dudes for UCLA. And Tennessee's choked and laid eggs in the NCAA tournament, but I just don't see that physical team, having too many problems with UCLA. Maybe if UCLA packs it in and Tennessee can't hit a 3, but I'm not a huge fan of UCLA this year.
All right, so Michigan State loses to Wisconsin 77-74 on Saturday. Before I let you go, we'll talk a little bit about that. But as far as Michigan State goes in this bracket, I think Michigan State's got a good, solid chance for chalk to hold and for Michigan State to get to the Elite 8. Whether or not Auburn will be there waiting for them, it's going to be interesting to see if that happens in Atlanta. I think Michigan State's got a chance to do that. Mr. Tom Izzo's pretty good at this time of year. I think that loss on Saturday, Izzo has just kind of wrinkled up enough to slap this team back into attention. He was bothered, Paul. Your post-game press conference, Izzo talking about pre-game speech, talking about the importance of playing all 40 minutes, and he mentioned missing a box out against UCLA in the 2021 NCAA tournament. He didn't mention it by name, but it was Aaron Henry on a free throw. UCLA gets an offensive rebound on a free throw, puts it back up and in, forces overtime, and they win in overtime. UCLA goes to the Final Four. and it was Aaron Henry, a guy that we really like, a good kid and everything, but Aaron Henry would just kind of fog out on things like that throughout his 3-year career at Michigan State, and Izzo tried to get him to sharpen up, and it was Aaron Henry that missed the box out that cost them that game and the ability to advance at the NCAA tournament. Izzo told that story, maybe he didn't mention Henry by name, but he talked about the importance of 40 minutes and how something like that small can cost you to move on in the tournament. And Izzo talked about little details that were left undone in this game, box outs, free throws, or whatever. He didn't mention it by name, but Jaden Akins with that missed box out foul, they hit 2 free throws, 74-70 with about 30 seconds to go. It's 72-70. They miss, rebounds there. Akins turns and goes chest to chest for a box out at 3-point range. I'm not saying that's the wrong way to do it. Antonio Smith used to do that in close, but to do it and lose sight of the ball, and then there's a long rebound and he's late to respond, he goes for the loose ball foul on Akins. Questionable foul call, but more in question there is we've seen Izzo teach it. Find your man, hit him, then find the ball. He didn't really hit. He went with his hands, and he didn't find the ball. With 30 seconds to go in a game and you're a senior, if you don't do it, then I'm not sure when you're going to do it. I love Jaden Akins as a kid, love him as a player, love him as a student. That was disappointing. First team all defense. Some people think he should have been conference player of the year. Had a tough day against Tanjay on Saturday, but he wasn't the only one guarding Tanjay. But Izzo was hungry to utilize that to show this is how you lose. This is how you go home. And if you don't do this, and if we're all committed to stamping out these little fog outs, Izzo's going to say something like, I promise you we can go to the Final Four. I promise you we can win a national title. That's what Izzo's going to tell us guys. So they just won 8 straight. They had a great season, 17-3 in the Big Ten. Maybe along the way, Izzo's like, maybe we didn't learn enough lessons. He didn't come out and say it this way, that maybe they needed a lesson. But he says when you win a lot of games, sometimes those little details, they become more and more dull. Izzo also said that during the course of the season, the accordion effect of the season, so many 2-day prep. He said we didn't get enough chance to talk about us and work on our shortcomings. Now, they did have a lot of off days here in the last week or so they had more chances to do that. I wonder if he's talking about different ball screen coverage communications, because Apollo blew one early in the game for a layup. There were some others. There's different ways that they play ball screens. Most of the day, they were pretty good at that, but not good enough to go to the Final Four. You got to play Final Four defense. We've seen Final Four defense for Michigan State through most of the end of the season. Didn't have it there in all cases against Wisconsin, and Wisconsin was good enough to make them pay, which is maybe what this team needed. And that's what Izzo's going to be harping on this week. Michigan State's going to have a long week now. They were back on Saturday night, Sunday off. Now, Monday, they'll start practice, and they won't travel, I don't think, till Wednesday. So by the time they get to Friday, they're going to be fresh as a daisy. Sometimes you can be so fresh that you're so tight and you hit the back of the iron all the time. I don't know. But Izzo's going to have a chance to really get into these guys psychologically this week. Paul, what did you see from Michigan State against Wisconsin on Saturday? Coming out of Indianapolis, your takeaway on that whole situation there against Wisconsin.
Well, first off, you'll never have to play them on Wisconsin on a no-day prep, right? The Big Ten tournament is different than you would play in the NCAA tournament, where you have a one-day prep. And I think you look at Jaden Akins missing the cutout and stuff like that. And you're talking about Aaron Henry, and I felt like Aaron Henry, by the time that he got to the NCAA tournament that year, they rode him so hard as a scoring option inside and as a do everything option. I thought he's worn down psychologically. Yeah. And it leads to dumb things that you wouldn't do normally for a kid that's mindful. And Aaron Henry in that tournament, I thought he ran out of gas. I thought Michigan State spent everything they had to get to the NCAA tournament that year. And they had a good game against UCLA. Should have won that game, didn't. I feel like in the Big Ten tournament, yesterday, I think it was tough for Jaden Akins playing Tanjay after going up against those Oregon guards who are very good and very tough to cover. Going up against a football body, and he was just really hard to cover. And Wisconsin did a much better job in this game of not settling for threes. When they went to Michigan State at East Lansing, and Michigan State won that game pretty comfortably, Wisconsin settled for a lot of threes. In this game, they did a lot better job getting downhill. Not just guys like John Blackwell, but other guys. I felt like Wisconsin ran their stuff really well. But I feel like Jaden Akins, like it was really hard for him to go from defending really good guards. So he's going against TJ Bamba, who's the other most athletic 6'5", veteran guy one day. And then the next day he's going against John Tonje. So those are two football type bodies. I feel like Jaden Akins had a hard time in that. You could see him having a hard time fighting through screens against Wisconsin. And you could see him having a hard time and not doing as much to challenge Tonje away from the ball, preventing him from getting the catch. He did such a good job of that when Michigan State played Wisconsin at Michigan State. I'm not blaming the 2 days next to each other, but I think it's a different dynamic for Jaden Akins, who spilled it against TJ Bamba and had a hard time the next day doing the same thing against John Tonje, who was very motivated for that game, given what transpired in the first game between these two teams. And I do think John Tonje is the best player in the conference this year.
It's a good point.
Feel that way.
It's a good point that you're playing that game on a one-day prep. At no other time during the season are you asking college basketball players to play consecutive days, except like the Christmas tournaments in Maui or the Thanksgiving tournaments. Yeah. So,
but even in those tournaments, you're usually not going to go from a physical athletic guy like TJ Bamba, who is like really hard to guard, to straight to another guy like John Tonje, who's even harder to guard.
Right. And that's why a lot of times when you get to these conference championship games, it ends up looking like church league basketball. It's just fumes, and people, you make shots, but you're not communicating in on actions as tightly as you would be with a one-day prep, an NCAA tournament, or 4 days prep for a Sweet 16 or a first-round game. And that's Michigan State's secret sauce, is having that one-day prep. And I thought Michigan State suffered. Now, as soon as they lose that game, they're getting ready to play Wisconsin after Wisconsin hit all those three-pointers. And Michigan they just played Wisconsin 2 weeks ago, so a lot of that is fresh. So they know what they want to do, but still getting it ironed out, you'd rather do it in a day of practice. And I thought that Michigan State, with the way they defend ball screens, sometimes they'll go up and under. Sometimes they'll jam and you go behind. Sometimes you don't jam and you let them go through. Sometimes you go over it. Sometimes you just completely go under. There's different ways, and they call it out as the screen is coming. There are a few times when Akins, his teammate, was jamming, and Akins would run into him, and then he would let him go through. So, like, just that split second is all I need for Tonje to get an open three-pointer. There were times when they weren't always on the same page. Cohen Carr had some trouble there. I mentioned Zapawa had one or two that led to just a few buckets here and there. And they just weren't as sharp as they would be on a one-day prep. Now, Wisconsin, if they had a one-day prep, their defense would have been better also. But Michigan State, there's a reason they've got all those banners. There's a reason that they do well in the tournament. There's a reason they won these Big Ten championships. They are great at getting into a scouting report and then transferring that to the minds of the players through short walkthroughs and film sessions. They've got that down to a science, but that science gets limited in a conference tournament situation. It's fun, it's exciting, it's entertaining, but it's sometimes it's like Coca-Cola and Doritos, Paul. It's maybe not so good for you. All right, so I'll let you go. Kohler made a three-pointer, 2 straight games. Hit a big one in this case, trailing on a blitz counter break and with 2 minutes to go. That was nice to see. I like the way Jeremy Fears got into the lane and scored against Oregon. Kind of ball screen, 15-foot pull-up, hit 2 or 3 of those at the foul line. That's a shot that he was afraid to take 2 weeks ago. He's obviously been working on it. They've been working on his mind to say, hey, I can make that shot. Also, this game, it wasn't the pull-up shots for Fears. He was taking it all the way into the lane, through contact, through traffic, hit some glassers, 2 or 3 or 4 of those in the lane. This team has a different component on offense if Fears, who's a dynamite leader, thinks the game really well, good distributor, but if he's also able to score at that mid-range and you have to jump out and honor him, that's going to open up things for dump-offs. The combination of Kohler, opponents are going to have to start getting out on him, and Fears being someone that you have to acknowledge as a scoring threat at 15 feet changes the way you can play the other guys. The way USC played a junk defense, Musselman, they had like 2 guys that just didn't even guard. They didn't guard Fears. They didn't guard Cooper. They're playing 5 on 3.5 everywhere else. Penn State did a little bit of that. Indiana did a little bit of that. If Kohler and Fears are shooting like this, it's harder to play defense. It's harder to use a junk defense against Michigan State. Michigan State went 1-1 in Indianapolis, but I think they come back a better team, Paul. I think they come back reset mentally, a little bit hungrier. Izzo can give them a swift boot to the rear. Secondly, I think Kohler's coming around. He's getting better. I think Fears is getting better. Carr is getting better, although he didn't play well against Wisconsin defensively in terms of communication. The other thing I liked, late in the game, Holloman came in. He was the quarterback. I wrote about this in the .comp column this morning. And he drove and missed that shot at the rim, got in deep but missed it, and then Izzo yanked him. He thought that Richardson should have gotten a touch on that possession. My point is this, that Michigan State, and I mentioned this in the VCast all season, Michigan State has not had many crunch time games. They've not played many games all year in which the game's been tight with a minute and a half to go, where you've got the ball, a minute and a half to go, who's your quarterback? Michigan State just won 8 games in a row. They didn't have any situations where you're down a point with 30 seconds to go or 50 seconds to go and you got to score. Now, Holloman had the half-court shot when it was tied. That one, Michigan State was winning that game by 9 or 7 with 3 minutes to go. It was a different situation. So they haven't had a chance to really test Holloman as the point guard late in the game. He was in this game, and it didn't go so great. Put Fears in there. Against USC, Akins had the ball in his hands late in that game, drove and missed like a wild shot. That's the last time we saw Akins be the quarterback late game situation. They went to Holloman for the next 2 or 3 weeks. Now the Holloman thing with Fears scoring in the lane, has that run its course? I like Holloman. I like everything he's done. But for this team to reach its ceiling, I think late game, the quarterback is Fears, able to get a shot for himself, but not as the first priority. Maybe not a last resort, but a second to last resort. But drive, draw, dish, and dictate. Fears as the quarterback with Richardson the go-to guy and Akins as a 3-and-D sniper that can hurt you. He's not your quarterback. He's not Batman, but like I said, he can be Robin. Pick and pop. Kohler's a 3-point threat now, or trailing in transition. Kohler getting into that A.J. Granger, Kenny Goings mode. Statistically, Kohler right now is very similar to what A.J. Granger was going into the 1999 NCAA tournament as a junior. They're both juniors. The stats are similar. Michigan State got better this weekend, Paul, even though they went 1-1. That's my take. I'm sticking to it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the other thing with Trey Holloman, he does some really good things. So you go back to the Oregon game in the first half. He had some really tough shots on mid-range against over Biddle, and I'm saying so it's like one thing you're like if the guy misses it, then you're like, this guy should take the shot. And I get it. I agree with what you're saying, but I think it's a feel thing.
Izzo didn't like it because Holloman did not read the situation the way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that.
Now, Holloman, if Holloman is having a good game and he's seeing drop coverage over and over and over against an opponent, and he's hit 3 or 4 of them, then you make an executive decision and you say, in this game, we'll go with Holloman late in the game. That's not a bad situation. That's not a bad option either to have that in the bullpen. But this was a rare situation where Izzo had a chance to really read one of his quarterbacks in a quarterback crunch time situation. They've not had many of those this year. We saw Holloman, what it looked like. Izzo opted for Fears. I think going forward, that's what they're going to go with. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, and I think Jeremy Fears, when he's at his best, and we've seen like the middle of the year, there was a stretch where he was really good against some of those drop coverage teams. When he's at his best, he can make that mid-range. He can get to the basket, but he's also got he also is seeing the court really well. And it's good to see him get his swagger back, in terms of having the element to his game. I agree with what you're saying about Kohler, but I think one of the things that, should be mentioned about the Wisconsin game, if Kohler doesn't pick up 2 early fouls, Michigan State's probably going to rebound at a much higher level. I think those 2 early fouls that Kohler had in the first half, that really hurt Michigan State against Wisconsin, because you're playing Xavier Booker. You don't want to necessarily, but the rebounding piece, I feel like Michigan State with Kohler, without foul trouble, you're looking at, instead of out rebounding Wisconsin by 4, you're looking at an advantage of 10 rebounds or something like that. And that's a really big deal. And when Michigan State has lost some games, you go back to a couple of losses. The Indiana game, bigs in foul trouble. That was, as much as people want to talk about the zone, and I agree that Indiana had success playing the zone, but one of the reasons why Indiana had success scoring and was able to score the points they did is because bigs were in foul trouble. Kohler's foul trouble against Wisconsin was a game changer, because it made it harder for Michigan State to cover the perimeter stuff that Wisconsin does with 2 7-footers that can hit threes. And they're not going to see that very often. There's not many teams that have 2 7-footers that can hit threes. But Kohler, he adds a different dynamic to the court. He's got some glue guy elements to him, but he's just fierce rebounding the basketball. And they missed him badly in that first half.
I agree, and that also drives home the fact that when you have foul trouble at Michigan State at that position, it drives home the fact that Xavier Booker did not come around this year, and it showed in this game. When Kohler gets a foul trouble, they go to Booker, and then it's Fiddler. Fiddler's basically the fourth big man right now. He's the ninth guy. He's the ninth man. He comes off the bench ahead of Booker. Zapawa, Izzo thought maybe the bright stage kind of hurt him a little bit. Zapawa had some really good moments through different checkpoints of this season. They need him to shake that off and become efficient and trustworthy in ball screen defense. And then that the foul problem for big men won't be quite as severe as it was in this game and the Indiana game. So Kohler's come around. I like Holloman. Carr's come along. But Zapawa and Booker, of course, hasn't, and Zapawa's been up and down, but they need that next layer of dependability from their big men, their reserve big men. I know that Zapawa starts, but basically he's a reserve guy in terms of minutes. He plays 9 or 10 minutes. So Michigan State's still searching for the peak, for their ceiling of potential. We've not seen it yet, but with Fears and Kohler showing new layers. I tell you what, Cohen Carr, he's got a couple more tricks in his bag that he's not shown yet. And he's got abilities to score that we've not seen. I'm not going to say what they are because I saw him in practice. We're not supposed to say what we saw in practice unless the coach mentions it first initially. So we'll see if a coach mentions it at all. But he's developing some skills in the lane. Anyway, all right, Paul, I appreciate your help. We got more coverage coming up at SpartanMAG.com throughout the week. We will be in Cleveland, Ohio, covering the Michigan State NCAA tournament journey as it begins on Friday against Bryant, and also possibly in the second round against Marquette or New Mexico. The draw, I've seen more difficult ones for Michigan State. This one has some possibilities. And when you got Izzo driving the train, they might drive it all the way to San Antonio, Paul. We're going to see. It's going to be fun. I'm not doing predictions, but before I let you go, your thoughts, Michigan State fans. They got some good stuff to look forward to here in the next couple of weeks.
I think so, and you just never know what's going to happen. But I got to tell you, this is one of the most fun teams that we've covered. This is my opinion. This is a great group of guys that's pulling for each other, that works hard, cares. And, like Izzo's always talking about distractions. There's not been a whole lot of those. And these guys want to win. And when you play as hard as these guys do, I think that you've got a good chance to make that run. And I've always felt like, and I know you believe this as well, I mean, it's easy to put too much, emphasis on the conference tournament. Sometimes things don't go your way. The bottom of the line is Michigan State played a very, very good Wisconsin team at its best. And I think, honestly, going back to what you were saying just a few minutes ago about them not being in a whole bunch of close games, but they haven't had a situation where there's been a star player go off on them. And, there are, Michigan State's defense has been very, very good this year. There hasn't been many instances of where it didn't work. And I felt like Michigan State probably scored enough points to win this game, but the defense didn't work, and they had Wisconsin punching till the very end. And that's rare because Michigan State's been in some close games, but at the end, the defense has clamped down. This is the first time we haven't seen that transpire, but I do think there is some value to that. And I think these guys will be refocused and re-energized. And you can't fake what they did down the stretch with those 8 straight quad 1 wins, the way they did it, defense, rebounding, teamwork. And I'm looking forward to seeing what these guys can do in the tournament. Who knows? I do think that the bracket's tough. Just the tournament field in general, I think it's difficult. And but I do think that Michigan State's got as good a chance as anybody. And if there's a team that I've covered that deserves to make a run, I think it is this team, because they put a lot of faith in their coach, put up a lot of faith in each other, and they've worked hard and been really, good soldiers throughout the season. And it's been a lot of fun to cover. And I want these guys to win, just because I've enjoyed covering this team a lot this year, and I think they deserve it.
Yeah, I'd like to see Jay Nakins have some nice chapters written about him here in the latter portion of his career. nobody's perfect. Michigan State had plenty of players that weren't perfect on Saturday. He's got a good heart. He's determined. It'll be interesting to see what he's got this weekend in Cleveland and the rest of the Spartans as well. All right, Paul, appreciate your help. We got some more writing to do. I'll be doing some writing tonight. We got Izzo press conference again on Monday. We'll have coverage over at SpartanMAG.com. Thanks for tuning in. And remember to go to Roback.com. Check out those Michigan State. The Michigan State apparel dropped earlier this month. Michigan State apparel over at Roback. Great, very comfortable active wear. I don't know if they call it active wear, but it's comfortable. It's good stuff. Paul, appreciate you. We'll see you later this week. Go to SpartanMAG.com. For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. You've been listening and watching Spartan Mag Live from East Lansing, Michigan. We'll be covering the Spartans all week for SpartanMAG.com. Take care, everybody. Thanks, Paul. Take care. See you soon.
Thanks.